Okay, now our first presenter, Ian Newby-Clark, is a professor of psychology and chair of the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph. Is it Guelph or Guelph?
Guelph.
Guelph in Ontario, Canada. So he's one of our international people here. He also served as director of the first-year seminars program there. He has an extensive publication record on such issues as sexual assault and gambling. Dr. Newby-Clark is one of our newest society members, and already he has greatly contributed to our studies. Today, he will be presenting an intriguing topic. What is science for? What is psychology for? Descriptive psychology encounters Nicholas Maxwell's philosophy of science. And I give you Ian Newby-Clark.
I think I'm probably going to stop about halfway through or so to see what questions there are. This is a bit of a different kind of presentation for me and for the group in some ways as well. So I thought stopping about halfway through would be a good idea. And I think that I've structured the presentation in such a way that there'll be a good amount of time for questions at the end as well. So yeah, what is science for? What is psychology for? And I'm going to talk about Nicholas Maxwell and his philosophy of science and marry it up, hopefully, with descriptive in ways that people here will find to be beneficial. And you'll probably note some similarities between Maxwell and descriptive and Osorio as we move forward. Things like terms like whistleblower, I think might come up along the way as well. So I'd like to start this talk in a bit of an unconventional way. I'd like to talk about me and a bit of my, and that's all I can stand is showing that slide. A little bit about my journey over the last few years as I became a member of the society and I learned more about Osorio and descriptive and how it changed my intellectual life and fundamentally. And I'm doing this largely because I know that we have a number of new folks with us today, and I'd like to give you a sense of where I was coming from and to share with you some of my own insights and experiences, and they'll also be kind of imbued throughout the talk as well. So around 2017, I had the good fortune to read an article by Ray Bergner called What is a Person, What is the Self? And it really was one of those life-changing moments for me in terms of my professional life, in terms of my intellectual life. I felt like I was finally reading something that made sense to me and that I believed could move my own science and my own research forward. And I had the good fortune of being able to talk to some folks from descriptive psychology pretty quickly after I read the article. And then I went to my first conference in 2017, and that's where it began for me. And I was impressed with how intellectually strong everyone in the group is, their diverse backgrounds, and of their passion for getting things right. And also a much better scientific literacy than I was encountering in my own discipline and continue to encounter in my own discipline at the time. And I won't go into a lot of detail about that because those of you who've been attending the conference are fully aware of the strength of the discipline of descriptive psychology and what it brings to the table in terms of one's ability to engage in conceptual analysis and move a research program forward. Think about client interactions in a way that moves to, that moves everybody in a growth direction. So I won't belabor that. I think that's pretty obvious, especially in some of the talks all the talks that we've seen so far. And so the other major kind of professionally moment that changed my professional life happened soon after. I read a book by a fellow named Nicholas Maxwell called, and I'm going to get the title wrong, In Praise of Natural Philosophy. And in reading the book, it became abundantly clear to me that he had a lot of very important things to say about what was going wrong with science and with the academy in general, and some of his proposed solutions for it. And it really did help coalesce a number of things for me about some other complaints I had about the way my discipline was operating, and some of the other mistakes it was making. So just to give you a quick overview of where I'm going to be going, I'm going to take you through, I mean, he's written a number of books. This is an over 40-year career of an incredibly accomplished philosopher and historian of science out of the UK, who's now retired. He's emeritus. And obviously, in the short time I have with you, especially because I want to get to other things, I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of him, but I'm going to give you a flavor of him and why I think that he can help my research program, at least, and hopefully some others in marrying it up with descriptive psychology. And I'm going to be talking about what Maxwell has identified as a terrible schism between philosophy and the sciences in general, something that I think that will resonate quite strongly with a lot of people who've been with descriptive for years and decades. Then I'm going to talk about Maxwell's prescription, really, that science would do a lot better if it moved towards something called aim-oriented empiricism that involves a remarrying of science and philosophy in a particular way. And he's going to be arguing, well, he does argue, and I agree, that one of the moves that can be made to make the scientific enterprise better is not to think about accumulation of knowledge anymore, but about moving towards wisdom. And again, I think this is something that will definitely resonate with the group. And hopefully I'll give an example of Maxwell's directives in action with my own work. I'll talk about just in very broad terms about my work on daydreaming and its relation to leisure, and in particular critique of productivism right now by a fellow named Trellinger. And then I'll go into what the connections I'm seeing between Maxwell and descriptive. And then I'm going to invite questions as well and talk about the connections in my work. And then I'm going to point to some other potential connections that I see, and then definitely lots of time, hopefully, left over for discussion. I realize now that I cannot see what kind of time I'm doing, so 1 second. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start off with some notable quotes from some highly accomplished scientists and their take on what science is supposed to be. So let's start with Max Planck. Experiments are the only means of knowledge at our disposal. The rest is poetry, imagination. And I don't think that he was being particularly flattering of poetry and imagination in that context. Poincaré, experiment is the sole source of truth. It alone can teach us something new. It alone can give us certainty. And more recently, the then president of the Royal Society, science is simply the systematic accumulation of knowledge based on evidence. Now, I think to a lot of us here, these quotes, though not terribly surprising, are also rather disappointing. They're kind of, this is certainly something we've encountered before, that there are highly accomplished scientists in the past and currently who think that the science is purely an empirical enterprise, and that you can proceed on that basis when it comes to moving the enterprise forward. And although that's certainly obviously not the case, and in some sense it's very confusing that they would be making these claims, but nonetheless they do. So along comes Nicholas Maxwell, and one of his books, of course, is In Praise of Natural Philosophy. He has others as well. And Maxwell is arguing that the reason that we're seeing these kinds of absurd statements that I just showed you before is because that there's been a terrible schism that has arisen fairly recently in terms of the history of human knowledge between philosophy on the one hand and science on the other. And that really is the driver of these claims that science is only an empirical enterprise, only a knowledge gathering exercise. And he goes on to point out what he says are problems with standard empiricism. And standard empiricism can be taken as equivalent to the kinds of quotes that I just showed you, where people think it's simply the accumulation of facts. And by implication, the only way that theories can rise or fall is by evaluating those theories against the accumulated evidence. So as I mentioned, yeah, so there's this kind of operative naive assumption that science is only about the accumulation of facts. Of course, I mean, what Maxwell and certainly many others have shown is that this is just simply impossible to follow in practice, that you can't actually move a theoretical enterprise forward of any kind simply by reliance on the accumulation of facts. Certainly, some facts, when accumulated in sufficient number, can suggest that a theory you have has a fault in it. What the history of science shows is that theories in those contexts often aren't abandoned. They're often simply repaired, and more so, it is also the case that for a given assembly of facts, there are an infinite number of theories that can account for that assembly of facts. And so what that points to is that science can't be and isn't simply the accumulation of facts to determine which theory is best, and we move forward from there. That story simply isn't true. And if you look at the way scientists behave, they're not behaving that way either. They look to other criteria, non-empirical criteria, to decide on what theory is going to survive and what theory is going to live on. And ideas of elegance of theory, metaphysical assumptions, for example, in the Newtonian-Einsteinian change, the idea of absolute time falls by the wayside but not for, strictly speaking, empirical reasons. It's because Einstein didn't like the idea of absolute time, and that's what drove him in a lot of ways to the relativistic revolution. And there are other examples as well where it's abundantly clear that it's not the accumulation of facts that's driving the scientific enterprise forward, but it's considerations of things like elegance, consistency of the scientific law under investigation, and the like. And so, and if you look at the way physicists and other scientists talk to each other, they do have these discussions where they talk about elegance and parsimony and things like that, which are non-empirical considerations. And so when Maxwell is arguing is that this schism that's occurred between philosophy and science is really quite a terrible one, because what it does is it separates the behavior of scientists from that of philosophers, and it doesn't have the scientists be in touch with what the philosophers are doing, and it leads to scientists to believing that they are solely engaged in the enterprise, contrary to how they actually behave, but has them come to believe that they're solely engaged in the enterprise of accumulating facts. And that means that they're under the illusion that they're going where the facts lead. They're not aware of their assumptions. And there are a number of examples, I don't have the time to go into them now, there are a number of examples of scientists being led astray because of that misunderstanding. And Maxwell has a whole side argument about the reason why quantum mechanics has gone wrong and has all these strange properties is because the quantum physicists haven't had appropriate insight into the blueprint assumptions that drive their work. And if they did, they would come up with theories that made a lot more sense. And so what Maxwell is arguing is that if we remarry philosophy and the operation of science, like they were once married up, that you would have philosophically literate scientists and scientifically literate philosophers, which is another complaint of his, and the entire undertaking could occur in a much more productive way. And he calls this aim-oriented empiricism. The idea here being that people are now aware that their particular enterprise, whether it be philosophy or science, exists in a coherent framework where metaphysical assumptions can be updated, theories can be updated, either based on metaphysical assumptions or data, and data can actually pass up the chain and alter metaphysical assumptions as well. And so the entire undertaking can be a lot more integrated and therefore productive. But further to that, he also he argues that all empiricism is aim-oriented, whether or not you call it that, and so you might as well call it that, and you might as well behave accordingly. And you should acknowledge the aims that you are pursuing in an explicit manner, and therefore you're more intellectually honest, and you're probably not going to get down too many blind alleys, or at least as few as possible. And he's further arguing that the best overall aim is wisdom, and he argues for a move from knowledge to wisdom. In fact, he wrote a book about it called From Knowledge to Wisdom. In which, in great detail, he goes into what he sees as the irrationality of the academy and some of the problems that arise when the academy itself believes itself to be in the position of solely solely observers and the accumulators of facts. Instead, he says that, and there are a couple different ways he phrases the question, but fundamentally, he would like the academy, and he's been arguing for this for years with only some positive results. He's been arguing that the best question to ask is, how can our human world exist and best flourish embedded as it is in the real world? And what he's arguing is that should be the central aim of all academic enterprise, and that if you marry up philosophy and science and have them work together, that these kinds of problems can be addressed. This particular approach does not rule out the learning of things for its own sake, because that's a human endeavor, and he regards that as fundamentally of value as well. But what he's arguing is that, given that there has to be some enterprise of this human endeavor that we call inquiry, science, what have you, that it's best aimed toward gaining wisdom, so that the human world can best flourish, embedded as it is in the real world. And I see a lot of resonance of Maxwell's question with what descriptive psychologists do, essentially, because I don't think descriptive psychologists would think of doing anything else, which I think is kind of interesting, and certainly it's reflected in the talks that we saw earlier today. But we can go into that a little bit later. That comes from In Praise of Natural Philosophy. So I think then I go on to the next slide. Yeah. So I'm finding it really kind of jarring to be giving a talk and not really seeing people's reactions or hands going up or anything like that. I'm not sure if the other speakers can share that with me, but I'm going to stop there and just take some questions, and I'll just kind of watch the time. But I think I'm doing pretty well for time. So over to you, Lori.
So far we have one question, and that's from Joe.
Okay.
Jeffrey. So you need to unmute yourself.
There you go. A general observation and then a more pointed one. So I read a lot of physical science. I spend most of my, as I said to Lori, otherwise free time reading things like general relativity and quantum field theory and immunology. So I'm very interested in the physical sciences. And one of the things that I notice is that let's be straight. I'm pretty much unqualified to talk about how the social scientists talk about their fields. But the physical scientists, I notice, are not very good about talking about their sciences philosophically.
Mhm.
They say things that are mostly nonsense. The physical scientists are physical scientists. They are not philosophers. They're not especially articulate about what they're doing. So that relates to your initial quotes. I don't think there's any physical scientist alive today who would agree that they are engaged in simply gathering facts.
Uh-huh.
And I think that if we had Henri Poincaré here on our Zoom meeting, which would be quite a feat since he died in the 19th century,
Yeah.
that would be the next upgrade to Zoom. I think I'm certain he would agree with that, because if you look at his work, Poincaré did fabulous work in physics and mathematics, which is all about, and here I get down to it, redescribing the empirical facts in a systematic, coherent, and precise formulation.
Right.
And the real point of empiricism isn't that we're gathering facts. It's that you don't just get to make up any old description.
Right.
It's got to be a systematic, precise, comprehensive coverage of your subject matter. And here I'm taking this straight from what Peter Sorio said about science.
Mhm.
Descriptions that can be covered, that can be taken literally and seriously. And the literally is the direct connection to empiricism.
Mhm.
So when Planck says energy levels go in quanta, now codified with the famous H bar,
Mhm.
he's not giving us a metaphor or poetry or anything else. He's saying this is how the physical world works, and what he means is, if you go and look, this is what you'll find.
Right.
And I don't know Maxwell at all, so I need to preface. If Maxwell is saying the physical sciences are just gathering facts, well, he just misunderstands what they are.
Oh no, no. I think everyone, including Maxwell, I think we're all in great agreement about what is actually happening. It has more to do with how it's going back to one of your earlier statements. It's going back to how people are talking about what they're doing.
Okay.
And
good.
And how the way people are talking about their doing is essentially an ironically mythology. Working scientists follow exactly what you're saying. They're engaged in systematic inquiry. They look for telling with the acquired facts. They also implicitly or otherwise mostly implicitly do have considerations about the way the world is in terms of consistency of law, all those kinds of things. But there's something lost when people don't understand what's actually driving their behavior. So it's like, why, going to a baseball metaphor, you ask this experienced base stealer, well, why are you leaving off this much, given the situation? He goes, I don't know. It doesn't, right? He does. He does know. But anyways, so did that answer your question? Oh, I think he might be frozen, or he's just being very pensive. There he is. He's back.
Okay, my connection dropped out. I don't know why, but it's back.
No, so I think what Maxwell is saying is that there's something lost when the scientists don't understand how it is that they're operating with respect to the metaphysical and other assumptions that drive their work, because there are those kinds of assumptions, right?
Oh, sure.
So and some of them are more accomplished scientists in history. For example, Einstein was very, very in touch with those kinds of assumptions. Like he had a major complaint with Newtonian mechanics, not because of the the Newton's postulates, right? Which were beautiful and elegant and all those things. It's Einstein said, well, yeah, but this calls for absolute time, and that concept doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but the reason it didn't make any sense, it just doesn't work physically and mathematically.
Right. I mean, that was something that was ultimately shown. But so what Maxwell is arguing is that there's tremendous benefit to marrying up these two enterprises and to having some cross coordination, right?
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that this is one of the, and I have to move on soon, but this is, I think, one of the interesting things about bringing Maxwell to this group is I think that a lot of what I'm saying is taken as read by all of us as this is how scientists behave, this is how we behave and this is how scientists should behave. But for a lot of folks, including people in my mainstream discipline of social psychology, these kinds of things are very, very surprising to them. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We actually have several more questions, but
Oh,
Ian, you need to let me know how long you want to go with questions right now versus going on with your presentation. Do you
Let's do like one more, and then I'm going to move on. And I think I'm going to have a good amount of time at the end for questions.
Okay, Errol was next. Errol.
Hi, thank you. I just a quick one. I just want to. You mentioned that as the slide suggests that Maxwell is moving from knowledge, talking about moving from knowledge to wisdom. And I also want to just offer kind of a parallel process that, well, my first question is, how does he define knowledge and how does he define wisdom, and what is the change that he's recommending? I like what he's saying about aim-based inquiry because of the fact that you're making that implicit assumption explicit, which is always going to help to clarify that sort of parallel level of kind of implicit communication. But the other thing that I was just going to offer is just to point out the one of the helpful kind of ways of thinking about this similar sort of parallel process. I've noticed you kind of reference it a couple of times. Like it just seems like descriptive psychologists get this in a way. Well, one way that we might be able to make that a bit more explicit. It relates back to looking at that timeline, which I don't know if you recall a few years back, T. Roberts had provided, which was super helpful as a former philosophy student turned psychologist, to just understand that like that progress from moving into like from, I think it was like from Kant to like Wittgenstein, and then from Wittgenstein to Osorio. So it's like, kind of talking about how thinking has an impact on the way we see the world, moving to saying, well, yeah, not just thinking, but also language and the concepts that we use with Wittgenstein. And then moving from that point to Osorio saying, yeah, well, language is a behavior and it's a person's behavior. And that's something that that's another implicit part of that statement. Even that Wittgenstein was saying that Osorio makes more explicit. So the question is just, and it may be part of the presentation that you're getting to, but how does he define knowledge as opposed to wisdom? And how does he clarify those concepts? Because I'm sure that he does, based on how he's kind of already, how you've sort of set this up a bit.
Right.
And the other point was just to draw that parallel from previous presentations, just because I think it really does, there is an explicit way we can talk about just what you're suggesting too.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So I think the best way to understand the move from knowledge to wisdom is to understand it as a move towards an aim-oriented endeavor. What he's arguing fundamentally is there are all sorts of ways that you, as an investigator, can behave with respect to learning about the world. There are all sorts of different kinds of facts that you can accumulate into a variety of ends. But what he's arguing is that in line with the original impetus of the the natural philosophers and going backwards as well was to answer questions like, how do we produce the most good for the most people, things like that. And so that if you are to use the tools of inquiry and science in particular to figure out how humans can best flourish in our world, that means that you're gaining wisdom.
Yeah, and just a
Okay,
very quick.
I'm a little concerned about
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Why
no
don't we
problem.
go
Sure,
on
we
and,
can talk later. Sure.
yeah,
Thank you.
let's come back.
But thank you. Very, very good questions. Thank you for this. Okay, yes, I will move on. Okay, so daydreaming. So what does daydreaming have to do with, and my study of flow of consciousness? What does it have to do with the gaining of wisdom? It's not entirely obvious on its face. And certainly when I got into my research on daydreaming, it wasn't with a particular noble aim in mind. I mean, certainly, to quote one of my friends and colleagues, research is often me-search, and I daydream a lot, and I found the topic to be fascinating. So that's probably why I got into it. But then I stumbled across a fellow named Trellinger and his writing about leisure as a right. And Trellinger pointed out something rather interesting about leisure, which is it's actually a human right that's embedded in the United Nations statement on human rights. And what he argues is that daydreaming is a particular kind of leisure, and therefore should be engaged in. He argues it's and so daydreaming is I take it that as imagining events often with a social interaction resulting in some good. It doesn't always have to happen that way, but that's the paradigmatic case. That's how I built my paradigm case formulation of daydreaming. And what Trellinger argues is that daydreaming is a way to build our political imagination. He's coming at from a kind of a critical Marcusean perspective, and is visiting a critique of the way modern capitalist society operates, which is very, very much based on productivism. And so what Trellinger is arguing is that by engaging in leisure and daydreaming, and in particular engaging the political imagination, this is a way that productivism can be resisted. That the constant push to produce more in our sped up world, to use a particular phrase, can be resisted by engaging in this activity, which is reinforcing in its own right, and I think in its best form really does ennoble people. So then I realized that probably just by happy accident, I stumbled across something that's fundamentally good about daydreaming, and by my pursuing my research in my particular way, by distinguishing daydreaming from mind wandering, by making that point in the literature, by not saying that all off-task thought is useless, etc., that I am contributing in my own small way to a move to wisdom, to hopefully words are failing me now, but hopefully to help my own discipline realize that there can be value inherent and otherwise to people taking a moment to muse, to think, and to engage their political imagination with what could be possible for them. And then I later realized that my particular version of marrying up descriptive psychology and Maxwell is very helpful to me in a number of ways. So what descriptive gave me a great amount of conceptual clarity in coming to distinguish daydreaming from mind wandering, coming up with my paradigm case formulation, coming up with my parametric analysis of what it is to daydream. It gave me these very, very strong conceptual tools that enable my empirical enterprise to proceed with a lot more clarity, and honestly, with ultimately with better data that better informs my understanding of the phenomenon and moves my scientific project forward. And then what Maxwell brought to me was an understanding of my aim, which I think I had implicitly, which was daydreaming is a personally gratifying thing. For me, I think it makes, when I daydream, I think it makes me a better, more engaged person in a lot of ways. It helps me think things through. And it really started to direct my methodology as well with respect to how I gather the data and make the distinction between daydreaming and mind wandering and planning, and the importance of thinking about anticipated social interactions and the like. And of course, this is but one small example. It was a small cog in a big machine, but it made me realize that by explicitly acknowledging my aim, I was no longer swimming around in some confusion about where I was going to be taking this, what my ultimate goals for the project are. So some other points of contact. I think it's something that's been implicit and then otherwise made explicit in the discussion today, is that what Maxwell and Osorio have in common in their own ways is an acknowledgement that the schism between philosophy and psychology, well, in Osorio's case in psychology, that occurred, or between philosophy and science that occurred, was really quite terrible. And really does lead to a lot of misdirected efforts and scientific blind alleys and uninformed investigators, and a great degree of scientific illiteracy as well, and philosophical literacy. So they both have this in common. I think that it really is about bringing back together philosophy in science in particular ways that really does enrich the intellectual journey of the people involved. They both, of course, point to the importance of pre-empirical work in their own ways. This is something that became abundantly clear to me when I became involved with Descriptive, the importance of refinement of concepts. For example, Maxwell's pointing to the importance of looking at the assumptions that are driving an empirical endeavor, all the way up to the metaphysical assumptions of the universe is understandable, is comprehensible. And they also by implication have a point of contact in understanding science as a rule-governed social practice. I don't think Maxwell would exactly put it that way, but the implication of him having this kind of ladder of comprehensibility of the universe down to metaphysical assumptions, down to particular narrow methodological practices, it really does have that implicitly, and I think that's something that can be brought out a little bit more. And I think both, really also hold dear that science is a human endeavor for human ends. Obviously, it's all over the work of Osorio and of the people who have been using the discipline of descriptive psychology for the last number of decades. If you look at the kinds of talks that we've been seeing about whistleblowers and socioeconomic status and things like that, there's an acknowledgement that really we are very passionate about understanding and bettering the human condition through the use of our concepts and empirical analyses. So it really is the ethos of descriptive psychology, I would argue. And I'm sure that there are many other connections that I'm missing here, and I'm conscious of the fact that many of the people listening to this talk this morning have been in descriptive for a long time, and probably see, hopefully, some other connections and ways of using Maxwell's guidance to further the mission of descriptive in a number of ways. But I think that's all I have.